Brought to you by Biologically.
Welcome to Conversations. My name is Suresh Kochatar. Today we have with us C. Raghu, a cardiologist who specializes in interventional cardiology procedures. He's a pioneer in transradial and complex coronary angioplasty stent procedures. Over the last 2 decades, collaboratively, he has performed more than 40,000 coronary diagnostic procedures and 20,000 coronary intervention procedures. Dr. Raghu manages 4 cardiac cath laboratories in various parts of India and abroad. Over the last 12 years, he has been a co-founder of the Prime Hospital that has become a prime part of the global Aster Prime Hospital family group in 2014. At Aster Prime Hospital, the team has performed more than 10,000 coronary angioplasty stent procedures. As you're all aware, 13th of October is World Thrombosis Day, and the theme this year is Eye on Thrombosis. So we will have a few questions for Dr. Raghu on this aspect, and surely he will share his wealth of knowledge with our viewers. Dr. Raghu, most of the physicians have an idea what thromboembolism is, but can you just delve into more of a depth on what exactly it is and how does it actually happen?
Thromboembolism is a disease where there are blood clots which are formed in the legs and in the thighs. They get embolized and get lodged into the lungs. So a thrombus which gets embolized in the venous system into the pulmonary artery is called a thromboembolism. This disease is not diagnosed because it is difficult to diagnose. The major reasons why a patient develops a thromboembolism is because of a venous insufficiency or the pooling of blood within the leg veins, which can be either in the calf, thigh or in the pelvic veins. So these thrombi, when they get lodged into the pulmonary artery, that is the embolism, which can disrupt the blood supply to the lung, which could be fatal in certain instances or could lead to pulmonary infarction, or for certain lucky people, it can go off on its own by a spontaneous lysis of the thrombus by the body's defense mechanisms.
Dr. Raghu, that is a good start to kick off the conversation. But the question I have is that most physicians actually would like to know which patient they should suspect have a case of thromboembolism so that timely detection and prompt treatment can be initiated. So what exactly is the symptoms that they should look for or the signs they should look for in case of a general physician who is treating such a patient?
There are the features of thrombosis and also embolism. As we have discussed, venous thrombosis happens in the leg veins or in the thigh veins or in the pelvic veins. So the symptoms vary where the thrombi are predominantly lodged. So going about this distinction, we have to distinguish between a distal thrombosis and a proximal thrombosis. A distal thrombus are those thrombi which are present in the calf area, whereas the proximal thrombi are usually the upper part of the thigh and the pelvic veins. If you see, if the patient develops a thrombosis of the calf veins, of the deep veins of the calf, then usually the patient can develop symptoms of leg swelling or foot swelling, or sometimes the swelling can be of a significant size, causing intense pain. But at the same time, certain of these thrombus in the ankle and in the leg region, they are not of a significant magnitude, so they might not have been recognize that they had developed a thrombus because the symptoms are very less intense or minor symptoms. On the contrary, if a patient develops thrombosis of the large veins, quite a few times the patient does not have any symptoms of leg thrombosis, and these patients usually develop symptoms after embolization. So we cannot rely entirely on the clinical symptomatology to say whether the patient has got a venous thrombosis or not. At the same time, when the thrombus gets embolized into the lungs, the patient can be asymptomatic if the thrombus is partial or very minor in intensity, or the thrombus can block one entire lung blood vessel or some segments of the lung, or sometimes there can be a thrombus at the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery, causing interruption of blood supply to both the lungs. So how do these positions present? As we have seen, the leg thrombosis is different from the thigh and the pelvic thrombosis, and when you go on to those patients with the pulmonary thrombosis, the patients can present with breathlessness, and most of the time they can experience palpitations because they develop hypoxemia, and that hypoxemia, consequent to that hypoxemia, the patients can develop a tachycardia. Though with this response, the patient can also have a chest pain if there is an interruption of blood supply to a part of the lung, causing a pulmonary infarction. I would like to point to you that there is an ominous sign of a syncope. If a young patient falls unconscious, then that is also a serious condition where the patient needs to be treated immediately. A patient with a suspected pulmonary embolism develops syncope means he is in the highest subset of high-risk patients. Now, who are the patients who are prone? Most commonly, it has got a bimodal presentation. One is the young patients who had a trauma to the legs, usually a sports-related trauma, or a trauma to the knee, which can be an operative trauma, that means in the post-operative stage, in the young people. Then the other group in the women with thrombosis would be those women who are on oral contraceptive pills. But when you take the elderly group of people, those are the group of people, if there is a venous thrombosis in the elderly people, we should suspect that there is and rule out an underlying malignancy, because malignancy is very strongly associated with pulmonary embolism. In between, via media, you have certain group of patients who have been prolonged immobilization, either because of an air travel or sometimes lying on the bed after a post-operative scenario, sometimes patients who had a head injury and then lying on the bed, or sometimes patients who had a sepsis, which is very common. They have been admitted into the intensive care unit because of some other reasons. So, and patients were lying on the bed. So those are the groups of patients we have to be very vigilant about venous thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. That is the reason why the European Society of Cardiology recommends prophylactic anticoagulation for all those people who are on prolonged restriction to the bed, especially in an intensive care setting and post-operative setting.
Dr. While you describe those particular set of people who are likely to get the thromboembolism problem, there is also this common perception that people who travel long distance on flight stay to US or Europe for 14-16 hours usually are sitting in a posture continuously, and they are most likely also to develop this problem. Is it true?
Air travel is one of the reasons for developing venous thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. As you have rightly pointed out, a prolonged air travel definitely entails a risk. But I would like to share with you, I have seen quite a few patients who had traveled for about a couple of hours of air travel also, developing a venous thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. So any degree of restriction of activity, it need not necessarily for 14-16 hours, it might happen even for a short duration of time. At the same time, we need to understand that there might be certain people who will be prone for developing the venous thrombosis even for a short distance. One of the common reasons is patients who have got a venous insufficiency where the venous pump is inactive. That means the veins are intrinsic, the venous valves are damaged, and there is a stasis of the blood in the veins. Those are the patients, possibly they would be more prone to develop the deep vein thrombosis and consequent pulmonary embolism.
Dr. Raghu, my main question, the question I'm coming back to again is, if a general physician has a patient with suspected thromboembolism, what test he or she should conduct for further confirmation?
The diagnosis of pulmonary embolism lies first upon the clinical suspicion. So one should be vigilant. Any patient in the setting, if the setting is right, one should always be open to consider the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Beware, this is a much more common diagnosis than what we all think. The investigative profile of these patients, we have been traditionally taught to do a D-dimer test to suspect whether the person has got a pulmonary embolism or not. But what I would like to share with you is the D-dimer test and the report and all those things take quite a long time, and it's an indirect investigation for us. Even though the guidelines lay emphasis on the role of D-dimer in the evaluation of venous thrombosis and pulmonary embolism, in a suspected patient, I would do a D-dimer, but pending the D-dimer report, I would first perform as a preliminary investigation is a duplex ultrasonography of the legs. That is a venous ultrasound examination with a Doppler examination. And you will be surprised to know that those patients who have got a venous thrombosis, about 80 to 90% of those patients who are in the ICU, if you do a systematic duplex ultrasonography, you will find certain degree of thrombosis. Now, those patients who have got a proximal venous thrombosis versus a distal vein thrombosis, proximal venous thrombosis are those patients who are prone for complications and especially major complications subsequently. Whereas distal vein thrombosis is not so serious course as compared to that of a proximal thrombosis. Now, after the venous ultrasound test, the third test what I would perform if the index of suspicion is high is do a CT pulmonary angiography. Many hospitals might not have a on-site CT scan machine, but still if the patient is clinically stable, then you can get a CT angiography with contrast and look at the pulmonary arteries. The diagnosis is quite easy, very easy to make a diagnosis of, because you can see directly the thrombi in the pulmonary artery or at the bifurcation or in the segmental or subsegmental pulmonary thrombi. So based upon the extent of the thrombosis, you can even prognosticate also whether the patient is a high risk or a low risk scenario of the patient. Having said that, we need to look at the fourth test being the echocardiography. We have to diagnose pulmonary embolism, but also we need to estimate the consequences of the pulmonary embolism on the heart. So we look at what is the degree of load on the heart or the obstruction to the pulmonary blood flow. So we can measure that by the pulmonary arterial hypertension estimation, and we can also look at the right ventricular function on echocardiography. So in addition, we can do various measurements of the right ventricle and left ventricle ratios, all those things either by CT scan or by echocardiography, and also once again prognosticate whether the patient is a low risk case or a high risk case. So summarizing, we have to do a D-dimer, we have to do a ultrasonography of the lower limb veins, CT pulmonary angiography if the suspicion of pulmonary embolism is high, and echocardiography to understand the consequences of the pulmonary embolism on the heart. Why we need to do all these tests is, if the patient falls into a high risk group, he should go for early thrombolysis. If the patient falls into a low risk group or an intermediate risk group, then we can treat by heparin. So these investigations clearly differentiate what is the line of management what we are going to adopt in treating these patients further.
As we bring this interview to a close, Dr. Raghu, my last question to you is, how should a general physician treat a thromboembolism patient? And at what stage he or she should call for a specialist opinion? Because that is the stage, I think, when they need something beyond what they're doing. And this is what my question to you is.
So, as we have discussed in the previous question, patients of pulmonary embolism fall into a low risk category, intermediate risk category, and a high risk category. I would definitely encourage the physicians to do an objective risk score stratification of the severity of the pulmonary embolism, adopting simple scores like the PESI score. So these scores will identify a high risk individual from a low risk individual. Once the patient is a high risk individual, then these are the patients who are going to get benefited by an early thrombolytic therapy. So we do not need to administer a local thrombolytic therapy, but we can administer a systemic thrombolytic therapy. Now those group of patients who are a low risk group of patients, if we can manage these patients by a low molecular weight heparin, or we have nowadays the new option of a direct oral anticoagulant agents. So the low risk category goes into a less intensive mode of treatment, and a high risk patient goes into a thrombolytic type of a therapy. Now we have an intermediate risk. So that is the intermediate risk group of patients where the clinical suspicion or clinical severity of pulmonary embolism is intermediate. Then we can do some other additional tests like the NT-proBNP or cardiac troponin. If they are elevated, then we can consider those patients are high risk group and manage accordingly. If they are not positive, then we can downgrade them into low risk category. So this is a practical way, but this leaves ahead a very minute chunk, about 2 to 3% of the patients who have got a large pulmonary thrombosis, patients presenting in shock, patients who are very sick. In those groups of patients, or those patients who have not got better after a thrombolytic therapy, those are the patients where we can perform catheter directed interventions. That means we can manually remove the thrombus which is lodged in the pulmonary artery using catheter based techniques. Pulmonary embolectomy is a surgical technique which can be tried, but it has got a much higher mortality. So the current day what we perform is a catheter based either a thrombolytic therapy, or we remove the thrombus by doing a catheter based embolectomy of the pulmonary artery thrombosis. So these are the various ways. So going on to the long term management, these are the groups of patients who need to receive a direct oral anticoagulant therapy for at least a duration of 2 years. For those low risk subgroup of patients, we have got two groups. One is a provoked and an unprovoked. Provoked means those patients who had a travel or who had a surgery and had a pulmonary embolism. So there is an insult which is responsible for the pulmonary embolism. So when there is an insult which is responsible for the pulmonary embolism, we can give only a 6-month duration of direct oral anticoagulants. But if there is an unprovoked, that means we do not know what is the reason for the pulmonary embolism, it's a idiopathic in origin, that's what we could have considered, or there is a coagulation abnormality, those are the patients we need to give anticoagulation for at least 2 years. And for certain group of patients, I would prefer to continue them lifelong because the risk of bleeding with a DOAC is much less. And for example, we have a cancer patient, we need to treat the cancer, and if the cancer goes into remission, then we can stop the anticoagulant. So we have to treat acute thrombosis, and it should be followed up with a chronic management of a pulmonary thrombosis and pulmonary thromboembolism with a prophylaxis option in our mind.
That, ladies and gentlemen, was Dr. C. Raghu. Extensive, analytical, and brilliant as usual. On this World Thrombosis Day, I'm sure the doctors and others listening in have actually been able to understand a lot more beyond what they knew initially. And this talk by Dr. Raghu is a pointer to that fact. We wish you a wonderful journey ahead in the times to come and keep watching us. In case you have any questions, also write to us on this email ID which is mentioned in this podcast and in this telecast. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I wish all the doctors, I hope this interview has helped you to understand about pulmonary thrombosis, thromboembolism, venous thromboembolism on this World Thrombosis Day. I extend my best wishes on the occasion of the World Thrombosis Day 2021.